God is one. God is truth. And at the heart of it all, there is really only one truth. This has become a popular sentiment among progressive religionists. It is said in the spirit of equanimity and inclusivity. It is intended to unite us. In this view, the world's great, and to be clear, by great I mean only those which have withstood the test of time, the world's great religions are merely different ways to reach and to become one with the Godhead, the single transcendent divinity. This is the opinion of thinkers such as Joseph Campbell and Karen Armstrong, who hope that in professing it, they can circumvent the sectarian strife that rends our world. If, they say, we could all just agree that behind the various dogmas and rituals there lies one all-encompassing truth, one God, we could realize that the cherished orthodoxies which we hold, fight for, are willing to die and to kill for, are only a means to an end and not the end in itself. I understand the desire to find a way out of the problems seemingly inherent in a multi-religious world. I share their frustration. I am disheartened and disillusioned by every harm to dignity and every drop of blood that is shed for the sake of and in the name of religion. However, I do not share their prognosis. That is to say, I do not believe, well-intended as it is, that by attempting to draw the focus away from the differences between the world's rival religions and shifting it instead towards some supposed universal spiritual truth to which they all point, we will at last all just get along. On the contrary, I believe there is an enhanced danger that in glossing over the differences in the beliefs and practices of one another's religious traditions, we are actually widening the gulf of misunderstanding that separates us. We are being unwittingly dismissive and therefore disrespectful to our fellow human beings. People are quite attached to their religious beliefs, but perhaps it is not because they are true. Perhaps being true is not and has never been the real point of religious belief. Let me say that again. Perhaps being true is not and has never been the real point of religious belief. In fact, if we take a closer look at the world's major religions, we discover that what they have in common is not a pretension toward truth with a capital T, and for some, not even an interest in such a concept. What they all have in common is the goal of utility, of being useful. In his book, God is Not One, The 8 Rival Religions That Rule the World and Why Their Differences Matter, religious studies professor Dr. Stephen Prothero makes the claim that what religions do, why they come into existence, and why they persist when they persist, is because they address a problem, an existential problem. In his view, religions do not arrive at a single universal truth. Rather, they start from one. They start from the belief that something is wrong. Says Dr. Prothero, in the Hopi language, the word koyeniskatsi tells us that the world is out of balance. Shakespeare's Hamlet tells us that there is something rotten not only in the state of Denmark, but also in the state of human existence. Hindus say we are living in the Kali Yuga, the most degenerate age in cosmic history. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic stories tell us that this life is not Eden. Zion, heaven, and paradise lie out ahead. So I thought it might be interesting to take a micro look at the religions cited in Dr. Prothero's book to see if we can draw any conclusions from them as a whole. We'll begin at the beginning, so to speak, with Hinduism, one of the world's oldest religions. Hinduism dates in its prototypical forms to 2500 BCE. For Hinduism, the issue is samsara. Samsara is a wandering through or flowing through, and what we're wandering or flowing through is multiple lifetimes. We are born, we live, we suffer, and we die only to be reborn again. This incessant reincarnation is not seen as an opportunity, as it is in the West, but rather a problem to be addressed. And the solution? The solution is moksha. Moksha is spiritual liberation, which comes about through the recognition of the unity of the human self with the divine reality. Moksha, the realization of the deathless, eternal part of oneself with the deathless, eternal reality, which is Brahma, can be brought about through a number of disciplines and practices, such as yoga. The word yoga, in fact, comes from the word yoke and expresses the idea of yoking oneself to God. Buddhism, which dates to the 5th or 6th century BCE, deals with the problem of suffering, the solution for which comes about through an analysis of suffering known as the Four Noble Truths. Simply put, number 1, suffering exists. Number 2, suffering has a cause. Number 3, there is a way out of suffering. And number 4, the way out of suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path, which in the interest of time I will not enumerate here. Buddhism says that if we understand the causes and the origins of suffering, we can reverse it. We can be in the world without suffering. To be in the world without suffering is nirvana. The term nirvana literally means to blow out, and it means the blowing out of egoism and ignorance and craving which cause suffering. Confucianism develops in China at around the same time Buddhism is spreading in India, that is to say in the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. Chaos is the central problem for Confucianism, lack of social order. Accordingly, the goal is social harmony, which can be brought about through the virtues of Ren and Li. Ren translates as human-heartedness. Li refers to ritual or etiquette or propriety. They are related concepts in that Ren has to do with fellow feeling and Li speaks to the idea of doing the right thing in any given situation. Together, these virtues make us social, which make us human. We become engaged in community. What brings Confucius' teachings into the realm of religion is the belief that there is an order in heaven, and ideally, the heavenly order should operate likewise on earth. Confucius believed that education was crucial to the success of a program that aims at social order. It is not possible to maintain an orderly society amid people who are ignorant of their history and their culture. Taoism, interestingly, arises as a rebuttal to Confucianism. All these rituals, all this learning constrains us into a life that is lifeless. What we need to do is live a life that is spontaneous, that is natural, that is free. The problem is a lifelessness that is pushed onto us by social conventions, Dr. Prothero tells us. And the goal then is a life that is well-lived, that flourishes, and that may, according to some Taoists, give us a kind of physical immortality. For the Yoruba religion of West Africa and its diasporas, the problem is losing track of one's true destiny. The Yoruba, who affirm reincarnation, believe that in between lives we are given the opportunity to choose our destiny. However, with birth comes forgetting, and we wander through life veiled from our true purposes, sidetracked by pursuits foisted on us by friends and family, co-workers, and spouses. The solution to this is to recover our true destinies, our true purposes, so that we can do what we were created to do for ourselves, our families, our friends, and the world. Fortunately, a pantheon of superhuman beings known as orishas will help us in this task through a variety of divination techniques. Judaism, the oldest of the Abrahamic religions, focuses on the problem of separation or exile and return. We are apart from our God, apart from our community, and we need to get back to them. There are two interconnected techniques through which this happens: storytelling and law. They are connected most visibly at the Passover Seder, where the story of the exodus from bondage in Egypt and the entrance into the promised land given to them by Yahweh is recounted. To recount the story, to remember, is a commandment. It is the law. Judaism is a religious tradition that rests not on belief, even belief in a God, so much as in wrestling with one's belief, with the law, with how to return. For Christianity, a religion that grows out of Judaism, the central problem is sin. The problem is that humanity is alienated from God and has been ever since Adam and Eve violated the only commandment given to them by God. For Christians, the taint of sin brought on by this violation constitutes a condition of existence. We live in a state of alienation from our true selves, from one another, and from our God. The solution, then, is to be saved from this state, this condition of sinfulness. How? God provides the possibility for redemption from sin by coming into the world as Jesus, by living a sinless life, by dying on the cross, and in so doing, by taking on humanity's sin. Taking our sin onto Christ's own body and soul makes it possible for us to be redeemed and thereby go to heaven when we die. Where Christianity becomes confusing is in the techniques that are considered necessary for us to be relieved of our sins. Historically, Catholicism required a combination of faith and good works, and Protestantism, at its inception, required faith alone, sola fides. But that is no longer true. There has been considerable blurring over time, and there continues within Christianity a debate over the relative importance of, as it were, creeds versus deeds. And this brings us at last to Islam. Islam sees the central problem of humanity as self-reliance, the idea that one can make one's way through life and into paradise, the afterlife, on one's own without God's help. We are prideful and we want to pretend that we can exist perfectly well without God, which we cannot. And the solution is to continually remind ourselves that we must submit to God, to Allah. The word Islam means submission. We do this through a five-fold technique known in Islam as the 5 pillars. The first pillar, the Shahada, is simply the profession of faith. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. This, recited with sincerity and ideally in front of other Muslims, is the entrance ritual into Islam. The other 4 pillars are prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage to Mecca. Lest the atheists in the room think they are merely polite onlookers, or on-listeners, as the case may be, to this discussion of religiosity in some of its many flavors, Dr. Prothero says no. Why? Well, because atheism is a kind of religion, he asserts, inasmuch as atheists also believe that their belief in the non-existence of God solves an existential problem, namely, the problem of religious belief. And as evidenced by the so-called new atheists, he adds, the passion and conviction with which this non-belief is expressed and defended is often more alike than dissimilar to the religious zealotry it aims to eradicate. So, what can we glean from this whirlwind tour of the world's great faiths? Several things, I think. First of all, we perhaps ought never forget that we have always been the species possessed of genius that we are now. We have always used whatever was at hand to derive or create explanations and solutions. never the strongest or fastest creatures, we have ever survived by our wits. In this sense, religion and science are not opposed to one another. There is, in fact, a continuity between them. In their speculative forms, both serve as methods of inquiry, and in their applied forms, both endeavor to fix problems. And who knows, perhaps other methods of inquiry yet remain for us to discover or develop. Also, let us take comfort, if not some pride, in something religious scholar Robert Wright points out. We should be happy that we're never completely happy. I believe it was Nietzsche who expressed something along the same lines when he said that his most decent characteristic was his ability to despise himself. We are a species that has no parallel with regard to mental capacity and therefore no role models. Likewise, we are a species that didn't come with a user's manual. Yet somehow we exhibit a moral imagination that is bothered by injustice in the world, that sees it as a problem and not merely as a given. It confirms that we're essentially good, but deem ourselves not yet good enough. Consider for a moment that it might have been otherwise. It could have been the case that civilizations were never civil, that humanity was never humane, that life in the human world started out poor, nasty, brutish, and short, and remained that way. If there is something to the idea that religions develop to solve fundamental human problems, it is our unquenchable desire to be ever better than we are that allows us to identify those problems in the first place. And there is also a lesson here. As I remarked earlier, people are quite attached to their religions, to the particulars of their religions, and herein lies the problem with the God is one view. It negates that there exist very real and important differences in these traditions. It glosses over such basics as that for some religions, such as Buddhism and Confucianism, God is none. We Unitarian Universalists may believe ourselves outside of, and dare I say above, the religious intolerance that is once again turning the world into a dangerous place. True, we do not settle for a false unity by cramming the contours of one religious tradition into another. We pride ourselves on tolerance of all the world's enduring religious traditions. But I, for one, don't believe that mere tolerance is good enough if our professed tolerance leads us to believe that we can be equally ignorant of all of them. If we think to ourselves, my a priori acceptance of your faith means I don't really need to know anything about it, aren't we not in effect saying, please don't be offended that I have no interest in something you hold dear? Don't take it personally. I have no interest in any religion anyone holds dear. What I'm suggesting is that such laissez-faire tolerance may not be sufficient if we will be genuine in enacting our third principle, not only in our congregations, but also in the world. I am suggesting that there is something disingenuous about encouraging one another to spiritual growth when we care not a whit what that growth entails. I am suggesting that religious tolerance falls short when what the world needs from us is something more along the lines of religious appreciation. And this brings me to my final point, and it is a question, currently an open question in my view. As the world's 9th great religion, what is the central problem, the central human problem of Unitarian Universalism? What is our problem? We are free to believe in God as we choose, but do not as a religious body seek salvation from sin, nor find it necessary to submit to a deity. Like Buddhist sanghas, we come together in communities of support, yet we do not seek to alleviate suffering by eschewing craving. We strive for a just society, though not at the expense of personal flourishing. So what is our problem to solve? And how shall we solve it?